On the docket tonight, the next live trial here on Court TV, scheduled to begin on Monday with opening statements in our gavel-to-gavel coverage. If everything goes as planned, James Curly Prokopovitz is accused of murdering his wife. She went missing, but no one has found her. Michael Ayala has the story for us tonight.
Victoria Prokopovitz's family is desperate for answers. The Wisconsin woman was last seen in 2013, and her fate is still a mystery.
You are constantly wondering, constantly searching, and you just live in this state of not knowing.
Now, nearly 8 years later, the man her family long suspected stands accused in her death, even though her body has not been found. Victoria's husband, James Curly Prokopovitz, is charged with first-degree intentional homicide. He has maintained his innocence ever since he first reported his wife missing on April 26, 2013. He told police that he last saw Victoria the night before in their Pittsfield home, then awoke to find her missing. Investigators noted that he waited several hours to report her missing. In fact, the only person he told was his stepson, who lived with the couple. It was the first sign, according to authorities, that something was amiss. Prokopovitz told police his wife had a history of depression and may have killed herself. But the investigation suggested a more complicated picture involving domestic abuse and financial struggles. Prokopovitz was in a relationship with this woman, an old flame, Kathy Friday. He told police they only reconnected after Victoria disappeared, but Kathy Friday's sister told police they began talking sooner. The relationship raised suspicions among Victoria's family. So did her husband's apparent disinterest in finding her.
We have no answers. We don't know how she left. We don't know where she is. We don't know if she's alive or if she's not.
As years passed, Victoria's family kept her name alive.
That's our big story at 10. A night of remembrance in honor of a Pittsfield woman. Her daughter is making these flyers.
The search for her continues.
Then, in 2015, Prokopovitz moved in with Kathy Friday. According to court documents, the two testified in a 2019 hearing that they bumped into each other by chance after Victoria went missing. Then, right after the hearing, they allegedly changed their story. In signed statements, the two said their first meeting was in fact planned. As Prokopovitz explained, quote, "The truth is, I was concerned what people would think about me if they found out I was involved with another woman so soon after my wife went missing. So Kathy and I agreed to come up with this lie, which we told the police for years, and ultimately I told the court under oath today." End quote. Within days, they were each charged with perjury and obstructing an officer for allegedly lying to investigators. Prokopovitz was also charged with intentional homicide as an act of domestic abuse for Victoria's death. Kathy Friday pleaded guilty to the charges, but she killed herself in 2020 while awaiting sentencing. Prokopovitz remains in custody, awaiting trial.
All right, folks, let's bring in our special guest from Milwaukee, Wisconsin tonight, criminal defense attorney and appellate attorney, Nicole Masnica. Great to see you, Nicole. Thanks for joining us.
Great to see you, too. Thank you for having me.
Let's start here. The big issue in the case is going to be that Victoria Prokopovitz has never been seen or heard from. Prosecutors don't have a body. How big of an issue is it in this case?
Well, I do think, for the prosecution to not have a body, you know as well as I that that is a really unusual thing. They both have to prove not only that, that the death actually occurred, but also that her husband was the one who did it and that he did it intentionally. And that's really a difficult thing because we don't know if it was an accident. Even if she did pass, there's a lot of question about how it would have even happened that the state really has to prove. And we don't really know how they're going to do that at this point. And the complaint really doesn't lend much to show us how that's going to happen.
Now, one person who may have been able to shed some light on all of this is the defendant's girlfriend, who was also charged with perjury, but she has passed away and is not alive. Is that a huge setback potentially for prosecutors because they could have struck some sort of a deal with her, or in the alternative, she could have been a witness maybe for the defense?
I think it is something that certainly can cut both ways. I mean, we're talking about somebody who's no longer available to be a witness at all, and probably her statements aren't going to come in. So she did testify, it looks like, in a John Doe proceeding, and that might be able to be admissible. But other than that, a lot of the admissions related to them coming up with a lie together and all of that information, that might not be able to come in at all. And that certainly, I think, is harmful to the state's case. So it really remains to be seen how this is going to play out at the trial next week.
You know, this is looking at the defendant, older man. Does he garner sympathy at trial because he's an older man, or do people look at him like, come on, really? All these years, and this is how you act, what you do. You don't look for your wife. You don't do anything that a legitimately impacted person would do. Your wife goes missing, you look for her. Your wife goes missing, you're a little bit upset, and it didn't seem to be any of that going on with this man. How do you think he plays? Because I don't expect him to testify, by the way. I expect him to just sit there for the whole trial. But how does the jury read that?
Yeah, and that's, something we'll have to see. But I think there's kind of a far cry between arguing that, maybe he's not the best guy, he wasn't a great husband, to that he intentionally killed her. Because, there were mentions basically that her son also was aware of this. He hadn't called the police, just like the husband didn't in this case, and he doesn't appear to be a suspect. So there's a lot, I think, that the defense can certainly argue in support, that there might be some circumstantial evidence, or maybe he's not the best guy, maybe he's not a good husband, maybe they had financial problems. But that's a far cry from killing your wife, especially somebody who had talked about killing herself and had a documented history of, mental illness and prior suicide attempts. It really is an interesting case, and I'm kind of excited to see how it plays out next week, because we really just don't know. It's such an unusual prosecution. So, it will be interesting to see how the state plans to try to establish that that she's both dead and that he was the one who did it.
And we know, right? We know what prosecutors are going to attempt to prove, right? That he's a murderer, that he killed her, that she's not alive. But how about the defense? Is the defense just going to sit back and say, listen, we don't know what happened, but they didn't prove anything, and that's all we have to do? Or are they going to have some sort of an alternative theory about why Victoria disappeared and where she could possibly be?
I think that the complaint sort of shows us that they're going to be talking about, or they're going to say that she probably committed suicide. It reads in the complaint and the initial documents in the case that this was somebody who had been suicidal in the past, had committed, attempted to commit suicide 2 times prior to this, and had actually just even gone to a mental health clinic the day before her disappearance and had a prescription change. So that's all really, relevant, certainly, to the defense. And they're really going to have to get all of that information in there and make it a tough hill for the state to climb. So, there are things to work with the defense. Even aside from there not being a body or really a cause of death, there's a lot out there for the defense, I think, to argue, against that the client did it, and certainly against reasonable doubt. That the state has to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, and I think there's quite a bit there.
It's always a challenge for prosecutors, especially when you don't have the victim. Nicole Masnika, great to have you on the program tonight. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, folks, as we said, Monday we expect the trial to start, but Friday, jury selection. That's the next court date, February 12th. That's Friday. We've got jury selection scheduled for tomorrow. And, of course, we'll continue to track it. And Monday morning, we should have a trial. All right.